for everyone who deeply respects, loves, and reveres all things holy that honor God, for anyone who acknowledges his power and wishes to please and obey him. This is the Salvation Report.
Salvation.
And now, here is your host, world-renowned author and researcher, Robert Stanley.
Hello and welcome to another Salvation Report. I am your host, Robert Stanley. I'm doing fine. I hope you are too. Today is Saturday, May 17th. And we're going to talk about something that's obviously very difficult to discuss, which is parasites. Well, we know, I have shown you in the past, for many years actually, that spiritual parasites do exist. Some people call them demons or unclean spirits, and they do exist, and they do harm. They clearly do harm because they feed off the negative energy that's emitted by our DNA when we hurt ourselves or others. I know I've said that a million times now, but I'm saying it one more time because it's true. So, but this is important also. What the spiritual realm extends into our physical domain. So naturally, there's going to be parasites that are physical and also that do physical harm, as well as mental harm. And I've learned a lot about this. I'm not a doctor, okay? But I'm going to share some information from scientists and doctors that is very revealing, highly instructive. And specifically, we're going to discuss this because in America, we're not allowed to discuss this. Doctors really are not allowed to discuss that. Is there a direct correlation? I think there is. The evidence seems to point in that direction. I was on a show recently this week, and the individual who is hosting the show said he'd had some experience with this, and he said, actually, when our immune system is weakened, that then parasites and other things can come in. And I agree with that. Clearly, we have been, we're under assault by demonic forces, satanic forces, whatever you want to call it. But we can, and here's the other thing, unless you know that this exists, you're not going to do anything to defend yourself or cleanse yourself. I told you before that one of the things that I did this year, my wife and I both stopped eating pork. That's only one thing. Alcohol is another, but anything that can weaken one's immune system. I mean, sushi too. That's another one. It clearly has a lot of parasites in it. You may not see it crawling around in your food, but it's there. The eggs, especially. I mean, the same thing we found. Unfortunately, found out rice. Rice usually has insect eggs on it. And under the right conditions, they hatch. And I know that's disgusting, but it's a reality. So we had to throw some rice away recently. And I mean, it's not the first time I've seen that. And insects, parasites, it's all the same thing to me, as far as I can tell. So you may have heard, since we're talking about parasites and cancer, excuse me, I got to adjust my seat here. A lot of people are talking about ivermectin and fenben or menbenzidol. Hope I said that right. Menbenzidol. Tongue twister. And its ability to rid some people of cancer. Well, those are antiparasitic medications. fenbenzenol. If I said that, fenben, this is short for it, is for dogs. But the same formula has been modified for humans called menbendazole. Yeah, menbenzidol. And so I took some of that for a week. That combination, ivermectin and menbenzidol, it definitely helps. My skin is clearing up. So the diagnosis that I had been given in 2019 when I came back from Hong Kong from a dermatologist group, and that, they swore when they did the lab test, punch biopsy, that I had a rare incurable disease. No, I just have parasites. And if you think you don't have them, I mean, if you never heard this before and you really think you don't have them because you're not having any symptoms, you better listen up. Everybody has them. And that's why things like ivermectin and fenben and stuff, it's available not just for dogs, but for cats and for sheep and horses and, you know what I mean? All kinds of livestock. They have to give it to them, this anti-parasitic protocol. We all need that because this world is polluted and all of our immune systems have been compromised. If I had a perfect immune system and I didn't eat unclean foods, which at this point I am, I'm obviously being a lot more cautious about what I put into my body and what I think, and controlling all of that so that I can be healthy, mind, body, and soul. But it's just like anything else. You have to keep your house clean, right? So, and insects come in all the time. Well, the same thing is true for our bodies. And I realize some people don't like to talk about this, but so sorry, let me go back to this. Especially in America, we haven't been discussing this. In other countries, as you'll see in some of my not my presentation, but down below, this on this page here on my Substack, robertstanley.substack.com, there's videos from other countries, such as this one. This is really startling, and it's no joke. And it is scientific. It's not theoretical. It's not some conspiracy. It's just science. And we need to pay attention to this. I mean, I highly recommend that you do. Again, I'm not a doctor. I'm not giving medical advice, but there are ways to do this. You can either take what I've been taking look, there's a lot of different things that you can do. I'll give you an example here. Yeah, there's different herbs and foods that parasites absolutely hate. And I've tried that in the past and I've had some success with it. Maybe some of you already know this, but it's really essential. Really is essential. So one of the things I wanted to do today is, in case you didn't know, it's a scientifically established fact that parasites affect behavior of the host, and that would be me or you or your dog or whatever, horse. Okay, so one of the things I wanted to just, again, I know I always give you guys way too much stuff. I have way too much stuff. Excuse me. But it's important, this is really no joke. What's going on here? This particular book, I haven't read the whole thing, but some parts of it are absolutely, literally mind-blowing. And that's what we're going to discuss here briefly. If I can do this correctly. Let's see. I know I'm still getting used to this. I'm sorry to tell you this. I've been actually busy doing other things. My memoir is coming along. I'm so excited about that. Eventually, it's going to get published. I think it's going to actually be this year. But anyway, so from the book, This Is Your Brain on Parasites, Chapter 4, Hypnotized. The author is talking to somebody in Czechoslovakia or someone from Czechoslovakia, much like my family. Oh yeah, he's an evolutionary biologist at Charles University in Prague. So where some on my dad's side, my they were all Czechoslovakian, which is now I think it's called the Czech Republic. But anyway, I'm an American, born and bred here. So, but anyway, this particular evolutionary biologist believed his mind was not fully under his own control. He often felt like an alien force was propelling his actions. That force was the cat parasite, a single-cell protozoan that he referred to by its scientific name, Toxoplasma gondii, or occasionally known as Toxo or T. gondii for short. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Anyway, he wasn't sure how he'd been exposed to it because cats, the only species in which it can sexually produce, shed the parasite in their feces. And one common way people become affected is by changing the animal's litter boxes. How many of you out there actually are doing that? If you are, you should be wearing gloves and a mask. I'm just telling you, that's a fact. So this individual doesn't know exactly how he acquired it, but parasites are very pernicious like that. They're opportunists. They will do whatever they need to do in order to find a way into a host. Otherwise, they can't survive. And more importantly, I mean, they can't reproduce. So there's a very strong they're determined. It's do or die for them, all right? But it has serious consequences upon us. Just want to reinforce that in everybody's mind. So this particular Czech scientist, biologists are scientists, right? He said, however, it happened. He told me this parasite was in his brain, and he strongly suspected it had altered his personality and made him more risk prone. What's more, his research led him to think that it might be tinkering with the brains of millions of other peoples, contributing to car crashes, mental illnesses like schizophrenia, and even suicides. Just want to interject here. I have done a lot of research on schizophrenia and talked to different experts about the matter. Some people say that it really is demonic or unclean spirits that somehow tap into our consciousness. And so that's where the voices are coming from. They are not internal. They cannot be medicated away because they're not internal. It's not a chemical imbalance. So as I said at the beginning of this report, think about the fact that it's not just one or the other, it's both. There's a spiritual parasite and there's also a physical parasite, but they both affect our health and well-being as far as our mental state. Okay. And the ultimate goal is to cause us harm. So what does it say here? Car crashes, mental illness, such as schizophrenia, even suicide. So if you add up all the ways it might harm us, he said, it might even kill people more than malaria, certainly in the industrial world. That's true, unquote. He sounded paranoid, but there was a reason to think he might be of sound mind, or at least as sane as one could reasonably expect for a man with a parasite in his brain. I think Robert Kennedy had also mentioned this. Hold on. Let me see. I just thought of this. Brainworm. Oh my. Okay. Okay, hold on. Oh, figures. New York Times doesn't want me to see this. All right. Maybe you guys consider this. Yes, I consider this a credible source. UC Riverside. RFK Jr. revealed he had a parasitic brainworm. And here's what we need to know. He revealed RFK Jr. revealed that he was diagnosed with mercury poisoning around the same time doctors discovered a parasitic worm in his brain, adding to questions about cognitive fitness during the 2024 campaign. Here's a professor of evolutionary biology says it is not necessarily a problem right away to have this infection, but it's really when the parasite is starting to die in the brain. So that's when a lot of molecules are released from the parasite cells that brain cells can respond to with an innate immune response that can cause inflammation. And that in turn can cause to neurological disorders like seizures. Okay. Yeah. All right. I really didn't know where this report was going to go, but that's shocking, I would think. Don't you think? Okay, back to this professor of biology in Czechoslovakia, or what used to be Czechoslovakia. Slavic people. I'm sort of Slavic. Half Slavic? I don't know. Okay, so this guy, his name is Fleger, I believe. Fleger sounded paranoid, but there was reason to think he might be of sound mind, or at least as sane as one could reasonably expect for a man with a parasite in his brain. I'd been pointed in his direction by a rock star among neuroscientists named Robert Sapolsky of Stanford University, whose own team's animal studies certainly showed the parasite was involved in some pretty wild neurobiology. Flieger's studies, he added, were well conducted, and I can see no reason to doubt them. Medical evidence also suggested the parasite may be capable of what the Czech biologist alleged. Since the 1950s, doctors have known that if a pregnant woman becomes infected with the parasite, it can attack her fetus, nervous system, and eyes, sometimes triggering miscarriages. If development continues till birth, the child is at greater risk of being born mentally incapacitated or blind. Toxoplasmosis, as the acute infection is called, has also long been known to pose a hazard for people with compromised immunity. And that's what I said before, right at the beginning. This came up in a conversation when I was interviewed earlier this week, which absolutely makes sense to me. Sorry, I'm trying to get comfortable here. Hold on. Whoops. This is crazy. Shouldn't be doing this on me during the show, but it's just like, man, I'm sitting here and it just doesn't seem, I feel like I'm sinking. Ever get that sinking feeling? Okay. All right. Serious now. Come on. Those at greatest risk are people who are receiving chemotherapy for cancer. Huh. Oh, let me go back here. Sorry. Toxoplasmosis, as the acute infection is called, has also long been known to pose a hazard for people with compromised immunity. They similarly may suffer damage to their eyes or develop encephalitis, a potentially fatal inflammation of the brain. That's exactly what they said about RFK Jr., right? And that was recent, by the way, that article I just quoted you. Those at greatest risk are people who are receiving chemotherapy for cancer or taking drugs to suppress the rejection of a transplanted organ. Okay, so here we go about cancer. Since they bring this up, there's, like I told you, if you're listening to this somewhere else or watching this somewhere else, please go to my website. I guess it's a website, Substack, robertstanley.substack.com. And I have a list of articles about this on that page in my Substack that you can get this information. I'm just picking this up from different other websites that and putting it together in a report for you, because this is real. Chemotherapy and radiation definitely compromise a person's immune system, leaving them vulnerable. I'm just telling you from personal experience. I've had a crash course in cancer oncology protocols lately this year, and Christianity, odd enough, cancer and Christianity. But it's really very obvious and logical that we need to be healthy our immune system needs to be active. And how can I say this without getting in trouble? Spike protein acts like a parasite in that it replicates in the body and it attacks certain organs. Now, if you're healthy and you can fight it off, I guess it'll have some kind of a, beneficial effect. But if you're not, if your immune system cannot fight it off, it can be overwhelmed. And that's why, in my opinion, so many people around the world are presenting with they call it turbo cancer, because it is unbelievably fast, the development. So tumors actually behave exactly like parasite colonies, and there may be a direct correlation. I can't quote you that right now. Again, there's plenty of literature on this below this report, this video report that I'm presenting here. So I highly suggest you take advantage of that. Another well-known group at risk are people with HIV. Okay, here we go again. It has been alleged, and there may be some truth to this, that people who have taken the cocktail of gene therapy drugs developed HIV. Some have alleged that HIV is actually in the cocktail of gene therapy drug. I'm trying to be very careful what I say here. It's not working. So I think you know what I mean, the jabs that supposedly were safe and effective. A lot of people have contracted AIDS from it. And that's not my opinion. That was in the news. Continuing, especially in the early years of the AIDS epidemic, before good treatments to counter the virus were available, toxoplasmosis was frequently responsible for the dementia associated with the disease. Oh, wow. I didn't know people with AIDS had dementia, but it kind of makes sense. Given this particular parasite, T. gondides demonstrated malevolence and habit of targeting the brain, it didn't seem too big a stretch to imagine that it might be stirring up less overt mental trouble as well. So, okay, since I'm doing this, I'm just interjecting my opinion here. Have you noticed how completely nuts some people are acting? Totally unhinged. And it can't just be because of a political difference. Excuse me. A difference of opinion. There's got to be some other component to it. And I have had experience with people acting like they're possessed or oppressed with, these unclean demonic spirits. But this is another component. This is really like the other side of the coin that we need to be aware of and do whatever is necessary in order to defeat it, because otherwise it can wreak havoc, not just in individuals, but into our society. In other words, people like this are already susceptible because they're infected and they're affected. So when you come along with another layer of, let's say, propaganda or some kind of rhetoric, constantly flashing images at them, and obviously, the electromagnetic spectrum on top of it all that is being manipulated. It's no wonder that some people they act like they've lost their mind, because honestly, I think they have. And it's no joke. It's not a judgment on my part. It's just an observation. Anyway, according to the standard medical wisdom, healthy people who are exposed to this. Oh, I'm honest. Yeah. Oh, okay. According to the standard medical wisdom, healthy people who were exposed to T. gondii typically developed only brief flu-like symptoms, after which the parasite quietly nestled down inside their brain cells and caused them no further health problems. What? This is according to the standard medical wisdom. Wow. This became a medical parlance called a dormant infection. Wow, that's, isn't that what they said about COVID-19 84? You couldn't tell it was there, but they knew it was there if they did these tests. You could, in other words, you could have no symptoms, you'd be asymptomatic, and yet they said, oh, well, you're a danger to society, so we got to do all this stuff. Anyway, look, I'm really sorry about, but these things trigger me, and I'm still trying to figure out what is wrong with my levels here. Seems like I'm just over modulating a bit. Anyway, standard medical wisdom is not very it's lacking in logic, in my opinion. All right, that's just my opinion. Again, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist. The author says, I weighed the competing views and vacillated, meaning she was conflicted, kind of both two minds, whatever, not sure. Could an eccentric scientist with little name recognition outside of Czechoslovakia really know more than the medical establishment? In search of an answer, I Googled him, and up popped a photo of a man with hair, a startling shade of orange that sprang from his head like wispy peaks of cotton candy. God, who does that remind me of? Oh, yeah, my neighbor, Orange Man, Donald J. Trump. She says, the author says, I think it's a man or a woman. Who wrote this? Let me see quickly. I should know who this is. Yes, Kathleen McAuliffe. She says, she Googled this man, this scientist in Czechoslovakia, right? And he has hair similar to Donald Trump. I decided it might be prudent to call a few more experts on T. gondii for their take on the scientist, this particular scientist that we're discussing here, right, with the brain parasite. So Joanne Webster, a parasitologist at University College London, who's widely viewed as a leading authority on the germ. They're calling it now a germ. Described his work as controversial, but she said a lot of his studies have been successfully replicated. Okay. The standard medical and veterinary textbooks say we didn't need to worry about the latent phase of the infection, but we shouldn't underestimate this parasite. Unquote. And I'm sorry, I'm reading here. This is hilarious. At the Stanley Medical Research Institute in Bethesda, Maryland, which I'm not related to any of that. Schizophrenia expert Efeler Tori also took the Czech scientist's work seriously. Quote, I think it's entirely credible, he said. In fact, Tori told me he himself believes there might be a link between toxoplasma and schizophrenia. Okay, yes, clearly there is. But like I said, it's a dual issue as far as infection is physical and spiritual, beyond the physical. That's what I'm talking about. Beyond that, when we say spiritual, or I say it, I'm talking about something that is in a realm that is not physical, but it is affecting the physical, just to be clear. The author says, it has been a long uphill battle for Flieger, the guy in the Czech Republic, right, to gain any recognition for his ideas. At the time he was embarking on his studies, the Czech Republic was recovering from decades of domination by the Soviet Union, whose apparatchiks tended to promote scientists based on who towed the party line rather than on the merits of their research. God, that sounds familiar. Oh yeah, that happened here. As a result, the country was viewed as a scientific backwater, which didn't sorry, it's not funny, which didn't enhance Flieger's reputation. During the Soviet era, there were few opportunities to travel abroad, hence the reason he never mastered English, which is the accepted language of science. and aviation, by the way, limiting his ability to disseminate his findings. But by far the biggest obstacle in his path, in his opinion, has been that people are offended by the idea that some stupid parasite might be able to influence our behavior. Yeah, okay. And this is, I guess I should have said this right up front. Part of the resistance that some of you might be having about listening to this or doing your own research or actually cleansing it yourself is because the parasite knows that you know at this point and is still manipulating you to not take action. I'm sure you all know, I have experienced it plenty of times. I still fight with it sometimes. Cravings for sugar and other things, specifically like, let's say, pork or sushi or whatever. I'm just using that as an example. That may not be coming from you. It may be coming directly from the parasite colony that is in you that you are hosting. That's a way. That's another way. For sure, that's influencing. That's an influence. That's a direct indicator of an influence on one's behavior, right? I just want to share that with you. To that list of hurdles, I would add one more. She says, his theory smacks of fringe science. Reviewers likely placed it in the same category as alien abductions, telepathic dolphins, and healing crystals. Okay, well, that's really convenient to marginalize something like this, which is quite obvious. It's really quite obvious. I don't know what year she was writing this, but here it is. What's that Flieger, the guy in Czechoslovakia, the scientist, down his unusual path of inquiry was a passage he came across in 1981, the newly released book called The Extended Phenotype. And that was written by Richard Dawkins. The passage described the suicidal ant that climbs a blade of grass at the command of a trematode in its brain, the very same parasite that a decade earlier had stimulated the young Janice Moore's revelation that manipulative organisms, meaning parasites, might be a potent force of nature. Okay, so that's accusing God of manipulating us through these parasite/organisms/ germs. I totally disagree with that. I would have to say, I'm going to assert, this is my opinion, this is my observation, that this is truly satanic. It's a satanic inversion of what God created. I don't know why I feel like I'm sinking in this chair today, and the microphone too. Come here. Okay. I know. I'm sorry. I know. I don't really normally read because it's a turn off for some people, but I know that most people don't like to read, or they simply can't. They're not. Maybe not you who's watching this, but there are people. Look it up. There's a statistical fact that quite a few people on this planet are illiterate, which may be why so many people spend all day looking at YouTube, but and the television. Okay, I digress. Sorry. I hope the volume's okay because I can't always tell with my headphones, these little earbud things. I made some adjustments recently. I really like the way other people's audio is on their podcast. I'm trying to replicate that here, so I'm trying different settings. Okay, so manipulative organisms might be a potent force of nature, you think? Clearly, the manipulation the first Fligger had ever heard of made a huge impression on him. Bizarre as it may sound, it got him thinking about whether a parasite might be at the root of puzzling aspects of his own behavior. For example, he reacts oddly to frightening situations. Quote, I think nothing of walking into the middle of traffic. And if a car honks at me, I don't jump out of the way. Unquote. Even if gunfire doesn't particularly alarm him, as a young man, he'd been visiting southern Turkey with other students when a battle broke out between the Kurds and the Turkish army. His friends were paralyzed with fear as bullets whistled overhead. He took cover but felt strangely calm. And he asked, what is wrong with me? Equally odd, he made no effort to disguise his hatred of the communists. feeling no alarm at what the consequences might be. In hindsight, he said, "I'm surprised I wasn't imprisoned." Unquote. And what did I say earlier? And look, this doesn't mean I'm absolutely right. It's an observation. Many of these unhinged people that we see on the internet and the television news that are acting completely unhinged, screaming and protesting and threatening violence, I would say it's extremely likely that they are infected and affected by spiritual as well as physical parasites. And they're not doing anything to correct the situation. And the medical establishment is lacking on this. I mean, they're really dropping the ball, in my opinion, especially here in the United States. And ultimately, especially with the COVID crisis, I think people finally realize that we all have a responsibility to take care of our God-given innate immune system so that we can fight off parasites. They are malevolent, by the way. This is what I'm trying to explain to you clearly. I mean, it's a violation of our free will when something like that comes in. We didn't invite it in, at least not knowingly. Continuing, over the next decade, the weird incidences piled up. Though slight of build, Flieger knows karate. Yet if someone attacked him, he would not defend himself. Wow. When he realized shopkeepers were cheating him, he didn't speak up. Quote, something kept me from protecting myself. Unquote. He started to think that he was somehow being hypnotized by other people, a concern that began to increasingly preoccupy him. With colleagues, he would get into long conversations about whether it was truly possible to be hypnotized, and if so, how could you prove it? Then, one afternoon, not long after such a discussion, a fellow scientist asked him if he participated in a research project, participate in a research project aimed at improving the sensitivity of a test for toxoplasma. Flieger agreed to be a guinea pig and soon learned that he was infected with the parasite. Wow. He immediately began to wonder if it was to blame for his recklessness and fears about being controlled by outside forces. So, again, I'm just going to reiterate. They are external and internal, spiritual and physical, or I should say non-physical and physical forces, satanic forces, meaning adversarial towards God, that are manipulating us. And that's why I'm doing this report, okay? Because kind of, I don't know, it just popped in my head. Maybe that's why cleanliness is next to godliness. Things that are unclean are not of God. God is not a slob. God is not a, hoarder. So, yeah, and I'm sure that's why the commandments, especially in Leviticus about food, is it's just so important. I know it's changed my life considerably. Excuse me. I'm not complaining, all right? I'm grateful. It's been this has been a very interesting year so far, and it's only May. Yeah, it's only May, middle of May. Okay, so I guess Flager is his name. He dug into the scientific literature at that point. Rats and mice, he learned, typically became infected with T. gondii, when they come in contact with cat feces on the ground while scavenging for food. Should those rodents then be eaten by a cat, the microbe breeds in its guts and will be defecated out the other end back onto the ground. And so, in this fashion, T. gondii goes round and round. Delving deeper into the literature, he was excited to read that a British scientist named Hutchinson had observed in the 1980s that infected rodents were hyperactive. Since cats are drawn to fast-moving objects, Flager wondered if the parasite was making the rodent run around more than it ordinarily would. In addition, Hutchinson found that infected rodents had greatly. Slow down. Hutchinson found that infected rodents had greater difficulty distinguishing between familiar and novel environments. Perhaps, in Flager's view, another way the parasite might contrive to get the rodents eaten by cats. I know that sounds weird. There's other examples of that. I can't quote them to you off the top of my head right now, but more ominously, some guy named European name, just his first name is Otto. He's revered as the father of Czech parasitology. Reported in the 1950s that individuals with schizophrenia were more likely to harbor T. gundii. Quote, the parasite can't know that it's in our brain and not a rat's, unquote, Flager reasoned. So maybe it's changing our behavior too. Well, of course it's not going to distinguish between, it doesn't matter what animal it infects. One host looks like the next to them. That's all. And they're not that sophisticated. They're not that intelligent. They have programming, and it follows the programming. And this is just one parasite, by the way. It's shocking how many there are. And I had a discussion with my pastor about this, and he told me, I said, did God create parasites? And he said yes. And I'm going, well then, but there's so many, and they're just so pervasive in everything. And he said, well, the Satanists can't create anything, but they can manipulate everything. They can, if they so choose. So genetic modified or manipulated organisms, especially through the advanced technologies of CRISPR and stuff, which is where we get Frankenstein's monster type of so-called viruses. It all, I'm sorry. This is really overwhelming. I'm just having way too many thoughts at one time here. Further research by him revealed that roughly 30% of people in the world were walking around with the parasites in their heads. That's, ouch, it gives me a headache. The majority of them completely ignorant of the fact. So if there was any foundation to suspicions, the health repercussions could be enormous. And I'm sorry to keep interjecting here, but this is actually freaking me out. Once again, I don't think ignoring this is going to solve the problem, obviously. And part of I want you to consider this, because it's probably correct. Can't prove it, but it makes sense logically. These parasites don't want us to know what they're doing to us. Just like when I was a kid, the first time I got bit by a tick, I didn't feel it. I didn't feel it biting me. What I did is inadvertently, I just was moving my hand across my stomach area. It was attached to my side, and it was clearly engorged enough that it had been there for a while and was feeding off of my blood. And I absolutely freaked out. Anyway. I don't know we did this research, but I would suspect it's more than 30% of the people in the world are walking around with parasites in their heads. In fact, it probably is the cause of Alzheimer's, and they just don't want to tell us. They're saying it's plaque, and I'm sure there is plaque, but I don't think it's that hard to test people. I just have a really strong suspicion about the medical mafia is really it's not there to assist. It's about making sure that the infections persist and that they just treat the symptoms rather than the cause. And what we're discussing today is one of the causes of so many different illnesses. I hope that's clear because this is really important. This is extremely important. And I would imagine that RFK Jr. knows about this. The position that he's in right now at Health and Human Services, he could actually do a revolutionary act by testing people of all walks of life and all ages for parasites. For parasites. In America, anyway. It wouldn't be that difficult to do. And I'm sure it'd have an incredibly beneficial effect on the health and well-being of everyone, which would lower the cost of healthcare, it was totally out of control. You already know that, right? Okay, so he finally came to the conclusion that the health repercussions could be enormous. No, they are enormous. And he learned that cleaning a cat's litter box is far from the only route by which people become infected. Yes, it's called a vector. Well, I learned this the hard way too about Lyme disease is not just carried by ticks. It's any biting insect. Any biting insect that can transfer blood from one animal to another, like mosquitoes, they can also be vectors for so-called Lyme disease, which was created in a lab by the Pentagon. And I don't know if it was released intentionally or not, but man, they sure have a history of lab leaks with these kind of incredibly dangerous things. Anyway, continuing, Flager says you can get it, meaning the parasite, by eating vegetables that haven't been scrubbed properly or by failing to wash your hands after gardening. Gardening? Okay, that would be me. No, I always do I do a lot of gardening. So does my wife. But we always wash our hands. It says grazing livestock can also pick up okay, let me just spell this for you. Capital T period. And then lowercase Gondii, T Gondii, from the ground. And the rapidly replicating organism not only travels to the animal's brain, but also produces thick walled cysts in its muscle, which is the flesh we eat. Whoa, I had steak yesterday with my wife. It was delicious, but now I'm feeling kind of nauseous. For that reason, people who consume undercooked beef or lamb are at greater risk of acquiring the infection. Oh, okay. Well, okay. I feel a little better now. At least she said, well, how'd you like your steak, Robert? I said, medium well. And she says, oh, oops, it's well done. So don't consume undercooked beef or any meat, actually, or lamb. Or those who do so are at greater risk of acquiring the infection. Brain parasite. Wow, indeed. In France, a nation that loves meat, I don't know, I've never seen this word before. Sagnant, which means bleeding. More than 50% of the. So what? I'm sorry. This is really blowing me away. Indeed, in France, a nation that loves its meat rare. Okay, that's what we call it, rare. More than 50% of the population is infected. The author claims here in parentheses, Americans will be happy to hear that the rates in the United States are far lower, typically ranging from 12 to 20%. Okay, so So people are getting tested for this? I didn't know that. Yet another way humans become exposed is by drinking water contaminated with cat feces, a common occurrence in the developing world, where a staggering 90% of people have the latent infection. Wow. To test the manipulation by parasites hypothesis, to test the mental manipulation of parasites hypothesis, Flieger would have liked to pick up where Hutchison had left off and run more detailed experiments on rodents. But housing and feeding animals is expensive. And like most Czech scientists in the period immediately following the Soviet era, okay, so this kind of tells you something about the timeline. He was short of funds. So he opted for cheaper experimental animals, college students, with the goal of teasing out psychological difference between infected and uninfected subjects. He devised questions based on his own intuition about how the parasite might alter behavior or thoughts. Some of the questions were: would you fight till the end if physically attacked? Do you believe that other people can control you through hypnosis or other means? Do you respond slowly or passively to imminent danger? If you realized you were being cheated, would you protest? To conceal the true purpose of the study from the participants, he mixed the questions randomly with 178 questions on a standard personality inventory. The results were not what he expected. An individual infection status had no bearing on how he or she answered any of those questions. There were 10 of them, actually. But people with a latent infection did stand out on a number of traits, and weirdly, gender influenced their personality profiles. Compared to uninfected men, males who harbored the parasite, meaning they were hosting it, were more inclined to break rules, were more reserved and suspicious. In contrast to uninfected females, infected women were more likely to abide by rules, and they also tended to have warmer, more outgoing personalities. Okay, I don't know what that means, really. Skeptical of his own findings, Flieger subsequently administered the personality inventory to more than 500 people outside of academia. For example, women who were tested for the parasite during pregnancy and blood donors. Again, he found a similar gender-specific trend in traits associated with the parasite. Participants in one trial were observed in the lab by a blind test to their infection status. In keeping with the finding that infected men are inclined to flout convention, the male subjects in the study were the most likely to arrive late for their blood test and were judged the scruffiest. Quote, they often wore dirty old jeans and rumpled shirts, said Flieger. Unquote. And infected women, quote, they were the most punctual of all and dressed the nicest. They wore nail polish, expensive clothes, and lots of jewelry. On a computerized test, however, infected men and women were surprisingly alike and very different from people without the parasite. Very different. They just seated before a monitor, subjects were instructed to press a button the moment they saw a rectangle pop up anywhere on the screen. Those who harbored the parasite had significantly slower reaction times. Closer analysis of the data revealed that infected people's performance began to deteriorate a few minutes into the task as their attention began to wander. Okay, the phrase, you must have heard this, brain fog is most likely caused by brain parasites. Just an observation. Again, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. I'm not giving you medical advice. So hopefully this video doesn't get taken off of some of the platforms it's on. Okay. So again, those who harbored or hosted the parasites, or let me put it another way. This isn't written. I don't like the way this is written. Those who were infected with the brain's parasite had significantly slower reaction times. Closer analysis of the data revealed that infected people's performance began to deteriorate a few minutes into the task as their attention began to wander. brain fog, and an observation that set him to thinking about whether there might be a danger behind the wheel of a car. Yeah, safe driving, after all, requires constant vigilance and a quick response to changing road conditions. Yeah, no kidding, especially in traffic. It's the worst thing about living here in Southern Florida. Some of these drivers are just, I always say to my wife, "Oh, that person's on drugs. Look at the way they're driving." It's either, and I mean either legal prescription drugs or illegal drugs, but they're just driving like maniacs. Now I'm starting to think, oh no, they're on drugs and they probably have, I mean, no, they must have parasites. Safe driving, after all. Okay. Flieger launched a study of 592 residents of central Prague, Czechoslovakia, and found that people with the parasite were 2.7 times more likely to be involved in traffic accidents than those of the same age who didn't have the infection. Since the strength of epidemiology lies in numbers, he conducted a follow-up study of a much larger population, tracking the incidence of traffic accidents. And those identified as having the parasite at the start of the investigation went on to have significantly more crashes. Quote, "I estimate that as many as 1 million road deaths a year can be blamed on this brain parasite." Unquote. Okay, that's an underestimate now. Again, I'm not sure when this was published, but consider it to be dated. There's a lot more people on the planet now. I'm having an overload here. I'm sorry. Just the only reason I'm reading this to you is because I know it's important. It's extremely important, and some people won't read it. They're not going to read this. Typically, because I put way too much for most people. I put books and articles and videos and just overwhelm people with these reports. But that's the way I do my research. You have to have multiple sources to be able to come to any kind of decent analysis of whatever it is you're studying and reporting on. It doesn't mean that everybody's right, but especially if you start to see a common pattern, theme, or consensus with these various experts, then you can consider it to be reliable. And that's why I'm reporting this, because I know it's real. It's a real problem. Okay. And it's a really, really big problem based on what I'm reading here. I hope you agree with me, and I hope you'll take action. I'm not done yet. More than a dozen years into his, wow, he was at it for a while. More than a dozen years into his toxoplasma research, he made another provocative discovery, or rather a rediscovery. While rummaging through papers buried at the bottom of his desk one day, he came across his first study on the topic, and scanning the tables of data, he noticed he'd made a statistical error in calculating his results. Rerunning the numbers, he found that participants' responses to a few of his 10 questions were strongly influenced by their infection status after all. In contrast to uninfected people, both men and women with the protozoan were, meaning the brain parasite, were much more likely to believe that they could be controlled through hypnosis. I imagine that most of you have heard of MK Ultra through the Pentagon. The so-called intelligence agencies were obsessed with controlling human behavior. For whatever reason, I cannot address their agenda fully. We just know, because it was a secret program, that it did exist. It may still exist, and I consider it, in my opinion, to be satanic, as part of the war in heaven, literally between God and the devil. All right, so this is it is a violation of our free will that anybody would consider, or any group would consider it necessary to manipulate the minds of the masses, supposedly for their own good, which I just totally disagree with the kind of mentality. But anyway, in other words, if I can tell you this and it's just in the public domain, don't you think behind the scenes, people in the Pentagon, specifically at DARPA, more specifically at they have a subgroup there of scientists, and I'm sorry, I'm blanking on what it is, but I'll just put it to you this way: they call themselves mad scientists, and it'll come to me when I'm not thinking. But the bottom line is, they are always doing experiments and coming up with all kinds of things. I mean, that's where the internet came from. And it's clearly highly manipulative. And we are definitely hypnotized by technology. That's a physical way of manipulating us, our minds, our souls. So this is really huge. Okay. If it would me also explain why the medical system is not diagnosing and treating people accurately for these infections, especially the brain parasite, which, I mean, come on, how many cats are there in America alone? I'm not blaming the cats, but they're part of the problem, because especially in America, how many people have cats in their home, meaning litter boxes that are full of these parasites that can be inhaled, and I should say are inhaled through the dust that comes up when you clean the litter box. Continuing, these people who are infected were far more inclined to report reacting slowly or passively to imminent threats and experiencing little or no fear in dangerous situations. Okay, I guess she met this person. The author met this guy, Flager, claiming he's more subdued. His office on the top floor of a university's natural science building was a sunny, inviting space, blah, blah, blah. He was clearly a man of cleanliness as far as his office, but his personal appearance was unkempt. True to his toxo or infected parasitic status, he wore old sneakers, faded bell-bottom jeans, and buttoned-up shirt that billowed around the waistline. And that's weird. I do notice, though, the people on the news who are protesting things like Tesla and stuff, they don't look normal. They don't look well. After shaking hands, I blurted out, quote, "I bet you love cats, right?" I said that most facetiously, but also just to be sure of how he felt about animals. And Flager's thinking did not always follow a predictable line of logic. His expression immediately softened, communicating an unmistakable infatuation with felines. Quote, "At home, we have at least 2 of them," he said fondly. "They have a little door, and sometimes cats from the neighborhood come to visit too." And then he went to his computer to show black and white photo of a tuxedo cat, blah, 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 boy and girl. And then so the author said, "You don't worry that they'll become infected?" And then he replied, "I would not like for my children to become infected. No, but if you keep your house clean, it is relatively rare that the infection will occur," unquote. Apparently, after the parasite's egg-like sac or whatever it is are defecated by a cat, it takes 3 to 5 days of exposure to air before they become infectious. He said, "Wipe your counters and tables down more frequently than that, and always wash your hands after changing a litter box, and it's relatively safe." She said, the author says, the word relatively kept popping up, but he continued with further reassurance that a cat will produce only a single batch of the parasites. I can't even pronounce this. It's whatever. It cannot become infected a second time. So it's only for a brief period once in your pet's lifetime that it could potentially transmit this brain parasite to you. And not all cats yet get infected. In fact, pets always kept indoors cannot get the parasite. And then he said, I think that gardening is the leading source of the infection. Gardening? Not cats. Okay. Learn something. And we started off, this guy said he didn't know how he got it, but he has cats. So I don't know. This is kind of a weird situation. This guy, again, even the author had said this, she wasn't sure if it was possible for him to truly be sane if he has caught a brain parasite, diagnosed with a brain parasite. Anyway, when the conversation turned to his research, his expression became solemn. Quote, it took several years for me to believe my own findings. Now I no longer doubt, but interpreting the data, that is much more difficult. Unquote. For example, he was puzzled by the finding that infected men and women sometimes have opposite traits. He said, quote, one possibility is that the parasite may cause stress, and men and women experience stress differently, unquote. There's a theory in psychology, he continued, that females cope with anxiety by reaching out to others. And it's well known in the field of psychology. Allegedly, I don't know. I didn't know that. But stressed men, in contrast, are more inclined to withdraw. He said the parasite's effects on personality are very subtle. If, as a woman, you were reserved before being infected, he said the parasite won't turn you into a raging extrovert. It might just make you a little less reserved. He said he was very typical of toxoplasma males. But I don't know whether my personality traits have anything to do with the infection. Yeah, this is vague. I don't know whether to even bring this up. Okay, I'm going to scroll down here because none of this is really important as far as I know. Okay, so Flager still believes the parasite is exerting an influence on human personality, meaning behavior. Quote, in laboratory experiments, we studied genetically identical animals that have been exposed to very similar environmental factors. Therefore, they will probably react identically to toxoplasma infection. In contrast, humans are much more variable in their traits and life experiences, consequently, and how they would respond to the parasite. It must also be remembered that psychology is not mathematics. Any psychologist knows that extroverts and consciousness measured with certain questionnaires and stuff are different. It's just going to be all over the map, is what they're trying to say. In other words, according to him, the disparity in his findings may be largely an artifact of the scales of measurement he used. Okay, hopefully this is relevant. I don't want to keep you too long with this because you can read it yourself, and you should. I know I need to read this more carefully, but I'm also doing something. I'm actively doing something or not doing something. I don't eat pork. I don't eat sushi, etc. And I'm taking anti-parasitic components in my life, drinking clean water, etc. And washing my hands when I garden. So coincidentally, at the same time, this Czech biologist first began his research about this brain parasite and how it might be manipulating minds of men as well as women and animals. A young British scientist at Oxford University, Joanne Webster, was entertaining the same thought, only she had the resources to test her hunch on animals. Webster would not learn of Flieger's work for many years later, but when she did, she was struck by the parallels in their discoveries. And by the time she started her work, examples of parasitic manipulations in invertebrates were common, but there was a decided something of paucity of cases in vertebrates, such as man. I don't know. This is crazy. Okay. She says, this particular scientist in England said, that got me thinking that toxoplasma would likely be a prime candidate for manipulating behavior. With the parasite sitting in the rodent's brain and the cat, its definitive host, this was a natural system where you'd predict it to occur. She soon confirmed earlier observations of her fellow countrymen. It's another English guy, scientist named Hutchison, who I talked to you before, who'd shown that infected rodents were active and less vigilant around predators. Then, studying rats in a large outdoor enclosure where they could roam freely, she found something much more remarkable. In one corner of the pen, she placed water. In a second corner, a drop of rat urine. In the third, cat urine. And the last, from a rabbit animal that doesn't prey on rats. She theorized the parasite induced the rats' aversion to the cat odor. Quote, we were quite surprised to see that not only did it do that, but it actually increased their attraction. They spent more time in the cat-treated areas, she said, unquote. Her team reran the test, replacing the cat urine with urine from other animals that preyed on rodents, such as dogs and minks, etc. Infected rats were not drawn to the smell of any predators except cats, leading to, wow. She came up with the tagline, fatal line attraction. Okay. Studies linking the parasite to reckless driving. Sorry. This is really in depth. I can't read to you all day long. This is just so some of this has been replicated in laboratories, what I'm reading here. But, you know, just look around you. I mean, I'm sure that people are infected and affected by this, and it is causing them to have aberrant behavior, meaning uncontrollable. All right, you see how enraged these people are. They call it a derangement syndrome. It's not just about President Trump. They're angry about a lot of things, and the way they express themselves is unhinged, delusional. Anyway, this is a really in-depth, really okay. Look, I got to stop. Get back to where I was. I'm feeling just blown away by this. But I'm also very hopeful. I know this is tedious listening to me read through this report, that book, Your Brain on Parasites. But there is a direct correlation to cancer. Let's see if I can go back here. I just want to show you something. This is a very important study. And there are so many of them, but they're mostly done outside the United States. And it's shocking, to say the least. I'm sorry I have to bring it up, but somebody needs to discuss it. I know I'm not the only one, especially when I was doing research for this report. There are quite a few resources out there, but generally speaking, most people don't want to discuss this publicly. So that needs to change. And I hope you found this helpful. I know it's really disturbing. I get that. I do. It's but there is a direct correlation between this and cancer, not just brain fog and being vulnerable to hypnosis and unable to protect oneself in a life-threatening situation, or it's just, yeah, it's shocking. It is, but it shouldn't be. I mean, when you think about it, what's going on here in this battlefield, Earth, the final battle between good and evil is being played out here. And the enemy is ruthless. the Satanists, the adversaries of God, they have no morals or ethics or love, compassion, and they truly are unhealthy. They act in a parasitic nature. And the opposite of that is symbiotic. Symbiotic, it means there's a reciprocity, there's a mutual assured assistance, as opposed to mutual assured destruction. Because that's what parasitism does. It always leads to destruction. It's unsustainable. So anyway, I always feel like I'm presenting way too much information for people to digest. But if you find this interesting, I'd like to hear from you. You can reach me at robertstanley.substack.com, or you can if you want to email me directly, it's unicuseditor@gmail.com. That's spelled UNICUS editor@gmail.com. All right. So thanks again for tuning in. It's always a privilege and a pleasure to speak with you. And until next time, may God bless you always and in all ways. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light up above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.